On today's show, we are joined by the New York Times best-selling author who has sold over 12 million copies of his books. His book titles include The Subtle Art of Not Giving a and the best-selling book, Everything is Also, Mark Manson is the author of Models, Attract Women Through Honesty. And on today's show, he joins us to share about the following topics and much, much more.
And I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, and I had messed around with some web design and stuff when I was in school, and I read that book and I'm like, that's it. I'm gonna start a web business, and then I'm gonna go sit on a beach. The funny thing about that book is that he doesn't tell you is that you make money while you sleep because you're working 16 hours a day to build websites.
Right. How many blogs did you write before you had any kind of traction at all?
Oh God, 100, 50, 100. You know, it's funny. I get asked all the time. People come to me and they say, you know, I want to start a blog or I want to start a YouTube channel. It's probably similar with you. Like, I want to start a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And my go-to answer is I say, write 50 posts and then come ask again, and I'm happy to help you. And I think in the last, you know, when it comes to content businesses like these, they don't blow up overnight. That's just the nature of them. Like, you're not gonna really hit scale for like a year or two. I started online in 2008, and that was 2011 when I had like my own product, and I was making like, I could live off of the money I was making from my own thing for the first time. You know, if you cleaned up your language, more people would read you, which I find hilarious, by the way, because I've sold like 12 million books, but we have to train ourselves to begin to ignore them and to sift through all of kind of the junk diet of information and hone in on the sources that we trust, that are very good, that are very well thought out, and very, very productive, not just for us, but for other people as well.
All this and more on today's interview with best-selling author Mark Manson.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
Now, 3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, and yes. Thrive Nation, on today's show, we are interviewing one of my favorite authors, the author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Mark Manson. Welcome on to the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
I'm great. It's good to be here.
Hey, your little orange-covered book is all over the place. Every time I go to the airport, every time I go to Barnes & Noble, every time I go anywhere, that orange-covered book is everywhere. Does it blow your mind to see your book everywhere?
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
It's wild. I mean, you've had a ton of success, but I'd love to start at the bottom of at the very bottom, the very beginning.
Sure.
And kind of share your story of how you grew up and when you figured out what you actually wanted to do professionally.
Huh. So I had a pretty typical, you know, middle-class background, went to college. When I was in college, I thought I was going to go into finance. And then I happened to graduate into the crash of 2008. So that didn't work out so well. And so I was bumming around for about a year, just taking odd jobs. And I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. And I had messed around with some web design and stuff when I was in school. And I read that book and I'm like, that's it. I'm going to start a web business, and then I'm going to go sit on a beach, and life's going to be easy. And the funny thing about that book is that he doesn't tell you is that you make money while you sleep because you're working 16 hours a day to build websites.
Right.
So it's I spent the next couple years doing that, and then eventually, kind of the thing that stuck was a dating relationship advice website, and from there I started writing, I started blogging because back in the day, back in like 2010 or whatever, blogging was like the hot new thing you had to do if you wanted to get traffic.
It was the move.
And then from there, the blogging took off, and next thing I know, I'm being read by like hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And from there, I get a book deal, and it's just like, it's been crazy. It's been a really crazy ride.
My mind exploded. Now, I want to ask this because somebody out there needs to get the little kick in the tail they need here. When you sat down to start blogging, bro, how many blogs did you write before you had any kind of traction at all? You know what I mean? Like how many blogs did you have to sit there? Because when you write it, it's like kind of putting a message in the bottle out there. For those who don't know how search engines work, but I mean, how many blogs did you have to write before you got any feedback at all?
Oh God, 150, 100. You know, it's funny. I get asked all the time. People come to me and they say, you know, I want to start a blog or I want to start a YouTube channel. It's probably similar with you. Like, I want to start a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And my go-to answer is I say, write 50 posts and then come ask again, and I'm happy to help you. And I think in the last 6 or 7 years that I've been saying that, maybe one person has actually come back with 50 posts written. In the last 6 or 7 years that I've been saying that, maybe one person has actually come back with 50 posts written.
In the last 6 or 7 years that I've been saying that, maybe one person has actually come back with 50 posts written.
My partner and I, Dr. Zellner, between the two of us, you know, we've built 16 multi-million-dollar companies. So there's an optometry clinic, and there's a brick-and-mortar men's haircut chain, and different actual brick-and-mortar companies, you know. And we only did the podcast because people kept asking, you know, can I pick your brain? Can I pick your brain? And we thought, well, hey, we'll do a podcast. That way when people say, can I pick your brain, there's a way to, you know, give them our brain without giving them our time necessarily. And we just now have passed the 2,000 show mark. And I don't think, Mark, we had any feedback from anybody at all until about 100 shows in. It's the craziest thing ever. Even though we'd had, you know, quote unquote, some success, it's like, is anybody listening? And you check how many downloads, and it's like, look, you downloaded it and I downloaded it. That's 2 downloads. So how did you keep yourself? Encouraged during that time before you gained traction?
Well, I think, you know, when it comes to content businesses like these, they don't blow up overnight. That's just the nature of them. Like, you're not going to really hit scale for like a year or two. And so the piece of advice I always give is like, okay, if you want to start like a YouTube channel or a blog or whatever, great. But like, you need to plan on that not being your main gig for the first year or two. You need something else going on, some sort of back end or some sort of like associated business that you're also trying to build. Because I just think people see the result. They see where I am now 10 years later. They see where you are however many years later. And they just assume like, oh, that's, you know, they think that's going to happen, you know, 6 months from now. And it's a slow burn.
How did you, or when did you first monetize your blog in any capacity? Was it like an advertiser? Was it somebody who hired you for some consulting? Do you remember the first time? I just want to know how long it took you to monetize it in some capacity, because there's somebody out there I want to encourage right now.
So initially my blogging, I'd say the first 2 years, my blogging was just used to get traffic and to basically do affiliate marketing. So to promote other people's products, other people's books, things like that. Yeah. I started a number of blogs to do that, and they all made a little bit of money, not much. But then the dating and relationship thing started to take off. And so after a couple of years, I decided, you know, I should create my own product and then start promoting that. And so that was, you know, I started online in 2008, and that was 2011 when I had like my own product, and I was making like, I could live off of the money I was making from my own thing for the first time.
What was your first product for the people out there who are not familiar with your story?
So I wrote a men's dating book.
Yeah.
Basically, because most of my readers at the time, I was like 25, 26. And so most of my readers at the time were around the same age. They're single guys. And so I wrote a men's dating book and just self-published it, threw it up on Amazon. And to my surprise, it did super well. It's still doing well.
Models attract women through honesty. Is that the book?
Yes.
Okay.
And so you wrote this. Now you start monetizing. So it took a couple of years to start monetizing this thing, and then my understanding is that you felt inspired to write a blog one day. That you decided it was going to be the most offensive blog ever written, potentially. I don't know if that was your goal. Tell us what happened the day you woke up and thought, you know what, I'm going to write this blog post.
Sure. Well, I'll throw in just really quick. There was a transition in there around 2013. So one thing I always did is I would start with like a super niche market. And then once I kind of saturated that, I would pivot into a bigger market. So, I started with like young men's dating advice. And then I went to just general dating relationship advice for men and women. And then I went from there into kind of the self-help market at large. And that whole process was probably like a 5-year process to build up that audience, like one step at a time. And so jump ahead to 2015 and my blog had caught on pretty well. I was getting probably 1.5 million readers each month. And I sat down. I was in a really cranky mood, and I had a title. I keep this sheet in my phone with like title ideas and article ideas and things like that. And I had this idea that had been sitting in my phone for a long time, and it was called "The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***." And I'd never really known what to write for that. It just kind of sat there. And then one day I was feeling kind of bummed out and angry and snarky, and decided I'm going to write an article and it's going to say many times as I possibly can say it. But it's also going to give some of the best life advice that I can possibly give to people. And the goal was to just like scramble people's brains, like leave them in a state of like,
right.
Well, this is so offensive, but it's actually really good. And I don't know what to do with myself. And that kind of cognitive dissonance it took off. It was absolutely crazy. I think that article itself ended up getting more than 10 million page views the first month.
I have a Judeo-Christian background. That's kind of my worldview, and I know it seems that a book called "The Subtle Art of Not Giving" probably doesn't have a whole lot to do with my worldviews. But there was a Bible verse that I love, Matthew 5:10, that said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Essentially, if you stand up for something, somebody is going to persecute you. Someone's going to be upset about it. No matter what values you pick. And I think your book is very emotionally liberating for a lot of people of all faiths and all backgrounds. Do you get that a lot? Do you hear people tell you that it's emotionally liberating for people to embrace that by standing up for something, somebody's going to be pissed off about it?
Absolutely. And I get that. I get the religious thing too. I did a couple podcasts with I did a couple Christian podcasts with pastors.
Yeah.
One of them said that he regularly recommended the book to his congregation. I hear that from Muslims too, from Buddhists. It's really that part really surprised me because it is a secular book. It's not religious at all, but I think so many of the life lessons are just so fundamental and part of the human experience that they're reflected in each of the religions.
Have you spent a lot of time studying the origins of the word?
You know what's funny?
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, I get the criticism all the time. If you cleaned up your language, more people would read you, which I find hilarious, by the way, because
Yes.
I've sold like 12 million books. But I get that email constantly. And so like 3 or 4 years ago, I researched profanity and vulgarity, and
Yes.
and I wrote a post about it, kind of explaining like, okay, this is why I use this language, and it's a very like I'm not using it because I'm just an idiot who can't think of other words. Like I'm using it very pointedly and intentionally,
Yes.
to kind of like slap people in the face a little bit, and it was interesting because most of what we consider vulgar today. It's only been considered offensive for the last 80 to 100 years or so. And it's really funny if you go back to like the 1700s or 1600s,
Yeah.
what was what was considered offensive back then is completely different. Like I discovered that in 16th century or 17th century England, the most offensive word you could say was occupy.
It's crazy. Occupy?
Occupy. It was like the most scandalous thing that you could possibly utter. I was
Occupy.
like, you know, it just shows you how arbitrary these things are. You know, words are just they're words, and the meaning, the significance we put on them, like we're choosing to put that significance on them, and the meaning evolves.
The first time somebody told me what it meant, they told me about this Scottish poem, I guess, that came out in 1500, like maybe 1503, 1505, something like that, where in the poem, the guy uses this acronym, and, you know, fornication under consent of the king, you know, because basically back in the day, if you wanted to have extramarital sex, or you wanted to just be a man whore, you could pay an indulgence for the right to do that, you know? And so he came up with this acronym, you know, which stood for fornication under consent of the king. And I just think it's interesting how a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a could teach my favorite Bible verse, Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of their righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I mean, seriously, it's like your book is phenomenal. Now, in your book, and I want to talk about your new book too, but in the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a you write, the act of choosing a value for yourself requires alternative values. If I choose to make my marriage the most important part of my life, that means I'm probably choosing to not make cocaine-fueled hooker orgies an important part of my life. I'd love for you to break down where you see most people struggling to reject alternative values in this world of political correctness.
Oh man, I think one of the things that I raised throughout the book is that I think people are very. So there are two things that I think happen a lot today. One is that that we simply aren't aware of our values. I think part of it is just all the distraction from all the technology and phones and blah blah blah. Like we become so caught up in just this like autopilot that we don't even realize what our priorities are a lot of the time. And then I think the second thing that happens a lot, and I think this is driven primarily by social media, is that we like to portray certain values, perhaps online, or to each other, that we don't necessarily live or embody or act in our real life. And I think the problem is that the media and the kind of the social media, but just the media environment in general, is rewarding that right now. So it's rewarding kind of like self-righteousness and moral outrage, and it promotes that kind of behavior and that kind of attitude towards people. And I think the right has had its own dose of that in the last 10 years, but I think right now it's the left's turn to like really just scold everybody as if they're everybody's mother or something like that.
I have a funny story for you, and this, I think you would like this, Mark. And Mark, you are kind of to blame for this. Your book is, okay? One of my clients, if you get a chance to Google search him, his name is Steve Currington. And if you Google search Tulsa mortgages, like you're looking for a mortgage to buy a house, his company, Total Lending Concepts, comes up top in the Google search results. And he's been a client of mine for 5 years, and now he did $251 million of mortgages last year. And he gets 1.75% on all that. He's doing great. Long story short is he bought a Lamborghini. That was one of his goals, to buy this neon green Lamborghini. And right away, just having a Lamborghini pisses people off. I mean, there are certain people that are mad and certain people that want to get a photo. But now in a town like Tulsa with 500,000 people, everybody knows him. Now, he is a very pro-Trump kind of guy. That's kind of his worldview, is pro-Trump, And so he recently auto-wrapped his car, a Lamborghini, with Trump and his crazy hair all over the car. And it's the crazy. No, I'm not kidding. And if you go to YouTube and go to Lambros right now on YouTube, it's Lambros, Lambros. He has millions of people that want to see this Lamborghini with the Trump wig on it. And it's the craziest thing because it looks like he turned Donald Trump into an action hero. It's amazing. It just screams a Trump-tastic America. And it's just it's American flags and eagles, and there's a big wall, going around our country, and it's this craziest thing ever. And he gets people that will clap and boo, but it causes people to react. Why is it so powerful? I mean, I just would like you to explain this because you've studied the science of this, I'm sure. But why is it that everybody in a town like Tulsa is going to know the guy with the Lamborghini with Trump on it, and no one's going to remember the guy with the Honda with nothing on it because he doesn't want to offend anybody? You know what I mean? Like if you had a Lamborghini with Bernie Sanders on it, why does everybody remember that and no one remembers the guy with the Honda and the conservative black so no one gets offended?
Well, we tend to remember things that cause an emotional reaction. And we also tend to overestimate the importance of things that cause an emotional reaction. So like, for instance, this is why everybody's freaked out about like the coronavirus, because it's very scary.
Right.
When like the flu kills 10 times more people every single year after year after year. It's that the flu is very boring and quotidian and not very exciting. So we forget about it. We don't pay attention to it. And this is one thing that I write about a lot. It's just that our human faculties are very flawed. We're very we didn't really evolve for truth. We evolved for survival. And so a lot of the way our perceptions work, our memory works, our emotions work, can actually work against us in a lot of ways, especially when we live in such a complex world where we have to deal with so many different kinds of people. So it's one of my kind of missions in life is to just make people more aware of how flawed their psychology is and make them aware of like, how a green Lamborghini with Trump on it driving by can like set them off one way or another. And like that, it doesn't matter. Like it's just a car.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just completely unimportant.
I've seen people so outraged, even before he auto-wrapped it with the Trump stuff. I've seen people outraged that he even has a car that costs that much. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's just wild how there's that. We want to be outraged. In your book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***, we are defined by what we choose to reject. And if we reject nothing, we essentially have no identity at all. So I'll pick on myself. I have 5 kids. They're great kids. And I have one wife. We've been married almost 20 years. And I drive a Hummer, and I live on a ton of land. I mean, just a ton of land, thousands of trees. That's kind of my thing. And I sort of reject a lot of things, but I wasn't aware of it until I'd read your book, how many things I reject. So I don't participate in social media except to put out content. I don't respond to stuff. I don't go out to eat when requested to. People ask me to go out to eat. I don't do it. I just don't. I invite people to my house, but I don't go out to eat. I never meet alone with women because I know myself and I just kind of want to, we're 3 or more gathered. I feel better about life as a married guy for me personally, And I have these certain things that I do. And I didn't realize how much it irritated some people that I have these certain rules I live by. Can you talk to me about, or talk to the listeners out there about some of the things that maybe we need to reject to become happier people? Like, what are some of the things that we need to, that maybe the average listener needs to start rejecting to get to maybe to be more at peace?
I think the big thing I propose all the time is we need to develop a habit to become kind of merciless with the information that we consume. I draw an analogy with the 1950s and 60s. So like when industrialized food blew up and suddenly like everybody can go to the grocery store and get Twinkies and TV dinners and all this stuff. Like for the first time in human history, like there's just this overabundance of really, really sweet and salty food for very cheap. And so for the first time ever, we had to learn how to manage our eating habits, manage our nutrition, manage our diet, start exercising, things like that. Like it's a skill that we had to develop as a culture in reaction to the abundance that we produced. And I think the same thing is happening today with the internet and information. There's this overabundance of information. There is the Twinkie equivalent of, shocking YouTube video or, upsetting tweet that just went out today. And it's our mind, it craves those things because they're very easy and they're very satisfying for a short period of time. But we have to train ourselves to begin to ignore them and to sift through all of kind of the junk diet of information and hone in on the sources that we trust, that are very good, that are very well thought out, and very, very productive, not just for us, but for other people as well. And so like I've kind of been on a crusade about that. And I don't, for some people that means getting rid of all social media. I don't necessarily, some people need some degree of social media to keep in touch with certain people or for work or for whatever.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like there should be a really, really strong screening mechanism of what you let onto your newsfeed, what you let into your inbox. There should be a really, really strong screening mechanism of what you let onto your newsfeed, what you let into your inbox. There should be a really, really strong screening mechanism of what you let onto your newsfeed, what you let into your inbox. And if you're a guy with 5 kids, I totally get it. Who you go to dinner with or how often you go out for dinners. Time is really the only truly scarce resource in this world. And so you need to protect it and you need to take care of it.
Well, there was an article that Paul Graham, the guy behind Airbnb and Dropbox and Reddit, that he sent out a tweet to an article that appeared in The Guardian called "Our Minds Can Be Hijacked: The Tech Insiders Who Fear a Smartphone Dystopia." And in that book, Justin Rosenstein, who created that Facebook like button, he was explaining how just some of the statistics that are out there and why he personally is now trying to avoid using smartphones and apps and that kind of. This is the guy who invented the Facebook like button. But he said the average person now taps their phone or swipes it 2,617 times a day. And Nielsen now shows the average person is on their phone 11.3 hours a day. And I just find Psychology Today has articles about this. What advice would you have for somebody out there who feels, maybe the business owners out there who feel, they own a bakery, they own a plumbing business, they own a doctor's office, a law firm, something like that. And every time they look at their phone, there's a bad review or a good review. There's a bad comment or a good comment, and they got all the apps set up there. They got all the push notifications going on, and therefore they can never actually be happy because they're in this permanent dystopia, seeking universal praise. What advice would you have for the business owner out there who's got thousands of data points coming in a day, and they're just letting those push notifications push their brain around?
Outsource it. I especially as an author and somebody who's very prominent on social media,
yes.
I have very strict rules for myself in terms of it happens about once or twice a year where I will somehow end up scrolling into the reviews of my own books.
No.
And as I'm doing it, I'm like, why are you doing this, Mark? Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yes.
And sure enough, I get there and I read 2 of them and I'm like, it ruins my day. The feedback's important, but the problem is that so much of the feedback you get online is just noise.
Right.
It's the Yelp review of somebody who's amazing bakery, but couldn't find parking, 1 star. If you see that as the business owner, that is going to upset you so much. But if you get somebody on your staff or an assistant or somebody and tell them look, once a month, comb through Yelp, find the 5 most useful pieces of feedback on Yelp, and then, write them out and send them to me in an email or something. That's super useful. And then you don't have to go take the emotional toll of scrolling through all of these bullshit emails and reviews and things like that. And having to go through the emotional roller coaster of reading those things.
I've noticed too, I'm going through your book reviews right now on Amazon. The trolls for my businesses, they love to write the long reviews. Oh, the trolls do. Now the happy guy usually will write a short kind of a to the point thing. So I'm seeing, love this book and the concept. Thank you. 5 stars. Oh, awesome. This is definitely one of my favorite self-help books. And it goes on 5 stars. Mark, you're killing it. But then the one guy who's upset, he's got a lot of time on his hands. He likes to write stuff. It's unbelievable. Now, for the business owners out there, to make this very actionable, one of the things we teach a lot in our business coaching program is the Purple Cow, the concept by the Thrive Time Show guest and best-selling author Seth Godin, where he talks about if you're remarkable, it's likely that some people won't like you. The part of the definition, that's part of the definition of being remarkable. Nobody gets unanimous praise ever. The best a timid can hope for is to be unnoticed. Criticism comes to those who stand out. I mean, you are standing out, but what advice would you have for the bakery owner out there or the business owner out there who is wanting to paint their sign neon green so that it stands out? They're wanting to paint their plumbing truck with a purple cow print to stand out. They are wanting to deliver that sermon that's going to outrage people but hold them accountable. They're wanting to, but then they don't want to offend anybody. What would you say?
It's impossible.
Okay.
And you know, this ties back into that quote that you pulled up earlier, which is, you know, think about these things in terms of who do you want to alienate? Because like if you're a business owner, or if you're trying to do something in the world, like you said, you're going to have to alienate somebody.
Right.
So ask yourself, who do I want to alienate?
That's
Which
so good.
customers do I not want coming into my bakery or into my doctor's office? And then position yourself accordingly.
That is good right there. Who do you want to alienate? We got to put that on a shirt. That is hot. That's hot. That's a book title for you, my friend, right there. That's
There you
book
go.
4 or 5. That's hot. Who do you want to alienate? Shunda. That is good. I'm going to hit my bomb button here. Oh, that's a glory. That was a good one. Okay, I'll move on. That was good. Now, you have a book, again, you see it, you find it everywhere, and you've gone from the blog guy to the book guy, the self-published guy, to now the best-selling author guy. So I just want to know, I want the process. What was your process like for getting a book deal? I think a lot of people want to know what that looks like.
It was a little bit different for me because I had a big blog.
Yeah.
But it's generally you always want to get an agent. And so what I notice when this question comes up, people tend to overestimate how important the book idea is. You know, book ideas are dime a dozen. Like it's like business ideas. Like we've all got business ideas, and none of it matters. And until you actually write the thing, none of it really matters. So people overestimate the book idea. They underestimate all of kind of the business stuff. So who's your target market? How do you plan on marketing it? Do you have an online platform?
Yep.
Do you have a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel? Do you have connections to, you know, journalists or other people that can promote it? Like that stuff is just as important, if not more important, than the actual book idea itself. If you're like, you know, it's like if Kim Kardashian wants to write a book, like they don't even care what the book idea is. They're like, here's some money, go write it. You know, it's if you have a platform and a marketing machine above a certain size, they'll figure out the book idea with you later. So
Yeah.
I think people need to worry more about the business side of things and a little bit less, you know, the idea will figure itself out.
How did you determine what agency to go with or agent to go with?
It's actually a really funny story. So when I wrote that blog post around the time, the subtle art of not giving a about blog post, I happened to mention on the website around that time that I was working on a book and I wasn't sure if I was going to self-publish it or publish it normally. And I got about 4 or 5 agents reaching out to me and setting up calls with me. And it was an interesting conversation because I was, you know, by that time I was making good money through my site. I was making good money from my self-published book. I knew if I self-published another book, I'd probably make high 6 or low 7 figures from it.
Yeah.
And so I went into these calls with the agents of like, okay, convince me why I should do this. Convince me why I should sign with a publisher and give them, you know, 70% of my royalties or whatever. And it was funny because all of the agents, they tried to be my buddy. They tried to be like, you know, they kind of promised me the moon.
Oh yeah.
They said, no, it's going to be amazing. Like, just trust me. And they tried to sweet talk me and all this stuff. And then I got on the phone with this one woman, and she consistently interrupted me. I could never get a word in. And then when I asked her why I should go with a publisher instead of self-publish, her response was, I don't know, do whatever you want, but if you want a publisher, call me back. And then she hung up on me. And I was offended for about 5 seconds. And then I'm like, that's the person I want negotiating on my behalf to other people. And so I called her back the next day and I'm like, all right, you're on. And she's been my agent ever since. She's amazing.
This just in, tips for getting mega clients. Talk over them and just don't let Mark Manson talk, and then you too can become his agent.
Exactly.
That is awesome. Okay, so now your book is everywhere. It's in Target, it's in Barnes & Noble, it's in airports. I mean, literally everywhere I go, I see the orange cover. And I've actually bought many copies of the book for my employees and for myself and for people I care about. So you've probably made at least $200 from my staff here, because I think you get like $2 a book maybe, right? I mean, it's not that sweet. People think you get a lot more per book, but hopefully you've made a few $100s off my staff.
Yeah, $2 to $3 each, I'd say.
Okay, well, so I've probably paid you $600 so far. So I need this help. If you're out there listening today, buy a copy of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. Let's get at least $1,000 in Mark Manson's pocket today. If you think about it, folks, all you got to do is go without a regrettable purchase from a convenience store. Don't get the regrettable burrito. Don't supersize a meal this week. Maybe fast for one day. Don't go to Starbucks for one day. Buy a copy of the book. And you could have been done, but you decided to go ahead and work on another book. And your next book is called Everything is a book about hope. What? What is this book about? What inspired you to write it?
Two things, really. I mean, the first was I'll say there's kind of a social component and then a personal component. The social component is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that I think by pretty much every material metric, being alive today is the best it's ever been in the history of humankind.
Truth.
It's just the world is amazing. If you take the time and just think about, if you think about what's happening right now, I'm walking around in sweatpants in LA with a headset on that isn't even there's not even a cord, and I'm talking to you, God knows where you are, and it's being recorded and it's being blasted out to, hundreds of thousands or billions of people or whatever. It's absolutely stunning.
Awesome.
What we experience on a day-to-day basis. And yet, when you look at mental health measurements and kind of the more psychological metrics, people are more anxious, depressed, and miserable and upset and angry than any other time in modern history. And so I wanted to look at, basically, to me, that says that there's something about modern life and all this technology and everything that is causing us to feel as though things are getting worse, even though they're actually getting better. And so I wanted to write a book that looked at that and took a real critical analysis of what it is about the world that is causing that.
We had a guy by the name of Daniel Goleman, the clinical psychologist, on the show, and he was talking about in this world of digital devices, we have to create boundaries that didn't exist before. He says, he talks about how you lived in this world back in the day, in the 1980s, or when I first started my first company, DJ Connection. Even though Mark became the largest wedding entertainment company in the country, do you know how many times I got a text message from an angry customer? Never. You know how many times I got a bad review? Never. Why? Because you couldn't do it. If you were pissed, what would you do? You call, you leave a voicemail, we call you on Monday. Right? Now, everybody's all hooked up to the devices, and Daniel Goleman writes, we need to recreate boundaries. When you carry a digital gadget, that creates a virtual link to your office. You need to create a digital boundary, a virtual boundary that didn't exist before. What advice would you have for the listeners out there who own companies where they have literally thousands of people at any given time who could be happy or pissed? I mean, I see so many business owners that struggle. It's like the bigger their company gets, the more depressed they get because they're always hooked up to the digital universe. What advice would you have for them to maybe create a little more happiness in their craniums?
I think that's a great piece of advice, the digital boundaries. For me, I've just learned throughout my career, especially as I become more popular and recognized and all these things, drawing that line between the professional and personal, and then sticking to that line, like not breaking it, is just so important for my mental health and sanity.
Yes.
And it's also better for my professional health and sanity. You know, it's like if I'm taking messages from my team during dinner with my wife and I'm stressing out about stuff like this or that, you know, it not only is it removing me from my personal relationships in that moment, but it's stressing me out, it's burning me out, and I'm going to be less available the next morning when I need to get up and be ready for work. So it's I just try to, if things come in after, when I'm done for the day, I'm done for the day. When I'm on the clock, I'm on the clock. When I'm off, like, it's just no emails, no texts. And if something comes through for whatever reason, I say, like, cool, I'll look at it tomorrow.
That is powerful. Now, in your book out there's somebody out there who's thinking about, they're going, you know, I'm thinking about buying the book. Everything is, but at the end of the day, I might not. I got to click the button. And I have carpal tunnel. I might have to go to Amazon and click a button, and I have carpal tunnel. My hand is very tired right now, but yet I'm very motivated to buy the book. It's hard. So
it's hard.
I'm gonna just kind of open the book and just kind of peer into it a little bit. Chapter 1 of Everything is book about hope is titled "The Uncomfortable Truth." What is the uncomfortable truth?
I feel like you should read, because I'm not going to do it justice if I don't read it, because it's the if you go to the second section, so there's a joke on there about, like, if I worked at a Starbucks, what I would write instead of writing people's names on the cup, like what I'd write instead is something akin to, like, you and everyone you know are going to die, and pretty much everything you do in your life is going to have absolutely no significance on the grandest scale of things. And it just goes on and on and on. It's like we're just a bunch of monkeys on a piece of dirt, like, you know, enjoy your coffee. And and it's called The Uncomfortable Truth because on the one hand, it is true. We are so tiny and insignificant, and things are so fleeting, and seem so minuscule in the grand scheme of things. But it's a fact that we all have to negotiate and kind of figure out for ourselves. We all are confronted with that truth at some point in our lives, and we all have to develop some sense of meaning and purpose for ourselves in spite of it. And that's kind of what the book is about.
This thing is this idea we've had a lot of emails recently from listeners about this, but when I built DJConnection.com, I sold it when I was 27. You know, so since the age of 27, I haven't really had to work in the way that other people have had to work, and so I have this little boutique, we'll call it, Mark, you know, consulting company, and I never take on more than 160 clients because I just don't want to. It's like I got to 160 and I was like, that's good. It bothers people though when you're satisfied and or comfortable with where you're at. You know, they almost feel like it's depressing when you don't have any huge goals to eat the earth. You know, I just want to tap into your brain and your goals here. What are your goals? Do you want to put out 10 books before the age of X? Do you want to you just want to make your next book the best book? How do you define success? Because I think it's very interesting when we interview super successful people to find out how you define success.
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because after Subtle Art came out, I really struggled with that, because I'd say previous to Subtle Art, I had a lot of those conventional metrics of success.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be a New York Times bestselling author. I want to sell 1 million books. I want to, do speaking engagements in foreign countries and all this stuff. And all of that happened in like a year.
Yep.
and so I suddenly was sitting around with a lot of time on my hands and a lot of money coming into my bank account, and like having no idea what to do with myself anymore. And so I've actually spent a lot of time the past few years thinking about that. And, you know, for me right now, I kind of think of it as I have a few missions in life. And one of them is I feel like the self-help genre or the self-help industry has a lot of toxic and kind of cancerous aspects to it. And so I want to disrupt that industry. And
yes, 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 and yes. I could not agree more. This is great. Continue. I love this. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, and it's that's beautiful because that's a long-term, slow-moving thing. I think the one thing I discovered the hard way is that having those very like numerical external metrics of like, okay, I want to do like $1 million in revenue or something. It's like that's nice. Like it's nice to have those and it's nice to get those, but they're not sufficient. Like you need some broader. And I think of it as like a mission in life. And so disrupting the self-help industry is one of them. Another one is the same one I mentioned earlier, which is simply like making these ideas about like understanding how our emotions drive our sense of what we find important, and
Yep.
how like a green Lamborghini feels important but it's not, or
Yep.
A few hundred people in China dying feels important but it's not. It's just scary, and those aren't the same things.
Yeah.
I want to raise the consciousness in the culture and have all these kind of psychological concepts. And psychologists have known this stuff for decades, but it hasn't seeped its way in. Like people haven't processed it yet. And I feel like we need to process, if we're going to survive the social media age, we have to process these things, or else we're just going to get, thrown into a hurricane.
Mark, we have 4 minutes and 4 rapid fire questions. So here we go. What is the disappointment panda?
Disappointment Panda is a superhero I created in subtle art, and his superpower is to tell people truths that they don't want to hear.
Awesome. Such as, maybe give you just one example.
So in the book, he walks door to door like a Bible salesman and knocks on the door, and somebody will come and say, I think you think that making more money will make your kids appreciate you, but it won't. And then he tells them to have a nice day and goes down to the next house.
Oh, disappointment panda. Okay, so Brett Denton, one of our thrivers out there, he's a very successful business owner, listener, client of mine. He built a gym called Cavell Fit. It's like a big group classes, a fitness training center in Boise, Idaho. And he writes a question for you. He says, "It seems you have a knack, Mark, for writing and researching in a way that is new and fresh. How do you determine the content for writing and how to spin it in a way that is new and interesting?"
Generally, I use myself as a barometer. I kind of trust that if I find it interesting and like if I tell my friends about it and they seem to find it interesting, that it's probably something that a lot of people are experiencing or thinking about.
Yep.
And then from there, it's in terms of writing it in a fun or clever way, I get bored easily, and so my bar is like I need to write something that I wouldn't be bored reading.
There you go.
And that's it.
Okay, final 2 questions for you. Thrive Time guest Nir Eyal, the author of Hooked and now Indistractable, apparently is your writing accountability partner. Could you explain about your relationship with Nir as it relates to being your writing accountability partner?
Nir's great. We wrote our books together. So being a writer is hard because it's very isolating, and it's really hard to keep yourself on task when you're just sitting in a room by yourself for 6, 8, 10 hours at a time. And so I met Nir a few years ago. We had both just started our last books, and we were both struggling to make much progress on them. And we discovered that we only lived like maybe half a mile away from each other.
Wow.
And so we started meeting up a couple mornings each week and banging it out, and we've been friends ever since.
Final question. You've got the mic, and before we drop the mic, you can say anything you want to our 500,000 listeners. Any word, message, book they should buy, action step you want them to take, disappointment panda quote, anything you want to say.
Well, I'm not promoting anything at the moment.
Sure.
So, just check out the books when next time you're in the airport. But yeah, I would say improving your life is about improving your problems, not necessarily improving your successes. So focus on choosing good problems and the all the good stuff will happen as a byproduct.
Can you dig it?
And I'm going to say this to the listeners. I don't want any of the listeners to feel bad if they don't buy a copy of Everything is the Book About Hope. I don't want them to feel bad. But I can say for as little as maybe $20 a week, you too could support a very successful author by buying a copy every week. So just keep buying that. Put that on auto ship. Get that stuff. Get that on Amazon. Mark Manson, thank you so much, man, for being on the Thrive Time Show.
Thanks, man. It was a blast.
Oh, Thrive Nation, that was an incredible show right there. Mark Manson, great author, great guest. If you learned something today, share that with somebody you know. Just share the podcast with somebody you know. Send them a text, send them an email, tweet it to them, send it to them on Facebook, maybe fax them an MP3 if that is in fact possible. But now without any further ado, we like to end each and every show with a boom. So here we go. 3, 2, 1, boom!
1980 was the year of my conception. From the dorm room founded DJ Connection. Entrepreneur of the year in 07. On my path to the top, I learned a lot of lessons. Kicked out of college writing a parody rap. Dissed ORU like a Trump and Rosie recap. I've been known for getting stuff done, not giving a crap. And for jocking up wins while my competition nap. Now it is the Thrive Time Show on your radio. Catch the broadcast or the podcast download. If you got a business, we'll help it grow. God's got a plan you just didn't yet know about. Workflows, systems, scripts, and hiring. Motivating yourself when you need inspiring. These faces made for radio and not TV. Talking everything from play to Z. Auto auctions, banks, haircuts, and glasses. You want to sell it, we've already sold it to the masses. No classes or prerequisites. Just business school as raw as it gets.
It's a Thrive Time Show on the radio. Yes, it is. Oh, yeah. It's all about you. 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 Yeah. So we bring the boom.
Yes, sir. It's Z and Clay, broadcasting from the box in the 918. Business school in the topic today. Check the syllabus, it's getting you paid. Making the business boom is what we do. You can do it, let us show you. I'm a father of 5 with maniacal focus to teach the proven moves, no hocus pocus. Cause get rich quick is not a move, but the proven system will make your life improve. See, I'm more than just a rhymer, like a horse with blinders. Focused on the Thrive Time Show is where you find us. He be the Z and I be the C. Teaching business skills from Clay to Z. We both grew up poor, but we're poor no more. The goal of this show is to help you score. I couldn't see the light until my son could see, but I learned to rock the mic in the high school scene. A young DJ with a $1 billion dream, numb to the pain that rejection brings. So I, like a sod farmer, sweated for that green. Now I'm on your radio with a thank you and please. Share this podcast with a friend and enemy. Now let's talk some business from Clay to Z.
It's a Thrive Time Show on the radio. Yes, it is. Oh, yeah. It's all about you. 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 Yeah. So we bring the boom.